years now, there's been a single symbol of peace, a man above the rest, a one-for-all type of guy, if you know what I mean. And of course, I'm talking about Superman. For half a century now, Superman has been the red-blooded, all-American, unstoppable peacekeeping machine. But somewhere down the line, things have gone wrong with Superman's story. Before I go any further, let me just say I love Superman. I mean, he's in my top 5 all time. And to prove it, here's a clip from our first episode of our run-through of Spider-Man for the PS4. Superman.
Are these in any particular order?
No particular order. Deadpool. Spider-Man.
Okay.
Saitama.
From One Punch Man.
Yeah, from One Punch Man. And, All Might from My Hero Academia. See? By the way, if you haven't watched us play through that game, it was great. You should watch it. But as I was saying, to the public, Superman has become stale, and there's a lot to credit why this has happened. Before I get into any of that, though, allow me to talk about him, All Might.
Fear not, citizens! Hope has arrived! Because I am here!
For those of you who haven't heard of him, All Might is one of the supporting characters from the Japanese anime My Hero Academia. He's sort of like Professor Oak. He's really important, and there wouldn't be a show without him. But All Might's story is so compelling that you end up caring about him more than most main characters. And it becomes pretty obvious that he's clearly the equivalent to Superman in this story. His superpower is called One for All. He essentially has super strength, speed, and reflexes, but the catch is, he can pass down his superhero to whomever he wants whenever he feels ready to leave it behind. But where the story of Superman fails, the story of All Might succeeds.
Let me just say, Superman was one of the first and only superheroes, so in a world with virtually no superheroes, when the first one gets created, they're bound to be OP, and that's what happened with Superman. He's the fastest, strongest, and has the most, and in some cases, weirdest powers. And when you're the first and only, nobody's thinking about limitations to make you interesting. You're already interesting. You're Superman. But once you bring in more interesting storylines and heroes, just being Superman could get boring. And that's what happened. Every time you see him, you know how the story's going to end. And if he's giving some form of limitations, then that's what the story becomes about.
And for All Might, the story is probably the same, but where it differs is the fact that when we're introduced to All Might, he's already on his downward slope. We missed All Might's perfect record career. As opposed to being the unbeatable god he was most likely seen as his entire career, we're introduced to a man who's practically crippled due to a wound he suffered 5 years ago. But the public is none the wiser. Now that's interesting. It's Superman, but he can only be Superman for so long before it starts hurting him, and he's keeping it a secret, and even better yet, that's not what his story is primarily about. It's about finding a predecessor. That's pretty cool. This guy has a pretty big weakness, and it makes me wonder what's going to come next for him. Even though, as All Might, he's the best superhero, at any point he could run out his daily clock of being able to be All Might, and he could end up in some serious trouble.
Superman's main weakness is Kryptonite. And Kryptonite to me seems like an afterthought, something they needed to use to make him interesting, and to show that the Man of Steel still bleeds.
Tell me. Do you bleed?
But like I said, it feels rushed. And to back up my claim, here's the supposed reason for Kryptonite's existence. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Seinfeld!
When Superman was a radio serial,
Right.
the guy who played Superman wanted to go on vacation. And they could not stop doing the series because it was a big hit.
Uh-huh.
So they invented Kryptonite that would hurt him but not kill him so that this guy could take 2 weeks off. So what you feel is exactly what happened.
Now, if that's the case, then that truly shows the time in which Superman was made, where such character-changing choices could be made with such little care and thought. Also, not to mention, Kryptonite leaves almost no room for creativity in situations in which it can be used. Superman can't get close to it. There it is. Work around that. Also, any unique ideas for Kryptonite usually come with another aspect of it that we the viewers are not already privy to, like how red Kryptonite makes him angry or whatever. There's also the fact that Superman gets his powers from the sun, which could be considered a weakness assuming you put Superman under an umbrella or something. He's also weak to magic, I guess.
But All Might's one weakness brings with it a lot of unique possibilities and suspenseful moments, some that don't even involve battling. Just the fact that he keeps his weak form a secret and only a few people know about it is interesting. There have been moments where All Might is in his weak form in a room and someone walks in and you, the viewer, are like, oh my god, here it is, the truth is out. But then it turns out that it's one of the few people who knows about his current state.
I love everything about the Death of Superman arc. The epic conclusion between Superman and Doomsday gives a definitive answer to the question, can Superman be beat? The answer being, not only can he be beat, but he can be killed! Doomsday, the toughest foe Superman has faced to date, and Superman both exchange blows in the streets of Metropolis until they both collapse dead. To comic book readers, this was the most shocking outcome that could have happened to Superman. Superman, the Man of Steel, the world's greatest superhero, is dead. Shortly after, the people looked for a new Superman. 4 contenders stepped up, all failing for their own colorful reasons. There was Metropolis Kid, a young hip 1990s version of Superman. Don't call him Superboy. Steel, a fat old man named John Irons who wore a mechanized suit. A lethal robot named Eradicator who looked exactly like Superman and almost immediately goes on a killing spree of the people of Metropolis, and Hank Henshaw, aka Cyborg Superman. Long story short, his backstory is a parody of the Fantastic Four, where he eventually ends up being stuck in the pod Superman crash-landed on Earth in, all those years ago. He was also evil. But apparently none of that was good enough, because...
What exactly does
DC Comics
want? We want more money.
And decided Superman wasn't dead after all.
Superman's not dead?
This, as you can most certainly guess, put a bad taste in the readers' mouths. Fans felt deceived. DC Comics sales plummeted, and all this to say, this is where Superman went wrong. They couldn't have left well enough alone. Comic books could have absolutely existed without Superman. It felt like he'd already run his course, and the placement of his death felt natural. Time to pass the torch.
Now, allow me to talk about someone we've yet to mention. Deku. Deku is where the All Might story corrects the Superman story. Deku is simply the next symbol of peace, chosen by All Might himself. Quite literally, a passing of the torch. Thanks to All Might, Deku literally has all of All Might's powers, and his story focuses on learning how to control it. It isn't until the All for One arc, which mirrors the Death of Superman arc almost to a T until the very end, that this torch is officially passed down. So basically the All for One arc happens like this. There's a villain who simply goes by the name of All for One. His power is he can take other people's powers. If he takes your power, you don't have yours anymore. Using this power, he created All for One. Nope. Using this power, he created One for All. The superpower All Might has, the only power that can be passed down to different people. All Might, weaker than he's ever been, takes it upon himself to take down All for One once and for all. He ultimately succeeds, but in doing so, he completely loses the ability to use his superpowers. The world's #1 superhero is no more. The whole world watched as he publicly passed the torch onto Deku. The main difference between Death of Superman and All for One, if you haven't already guessed, is that All Might didn't die. The writers finished All Might's story the way they wanted to, and did it in a way that was satisfying for the readers and viewers. Because All Might isn't dead, that means we're stuck in the nebulous aftermath arc that DC Comics was left in, and the only way they could ruin it now is if All Might somehow gets his powers back, which at this point seems pretty unlikely considering his entire arc from start to finish has focused around passing the torch. And since the torch has officially been passed down and the story doesn't revolve around All Might, it can still revolve around One for All. Even if something happens to Deku, as long as he passes on One for All, the story can still focus on the world's strongest superhero.
At the end of the day, Superman and All Might are both great. The only reason All Might exists and his story is better is because of the hills and valleys Superman's story went through. The writers of My Hero Academia clearly drew inspiration from the Death of Superman while correcting its narrative wrongs as they see it fit. And I think, for what it's worth, they did a damn good job. Until next time, I'm Lightning.
And I'm Thunder.
In whatever Chris wants to say here.